Thanks for your patience. So, this presentation is about the evolution of sexual abuse, Dr. Bakari's theory. And one of the things that happened once I started living openly as a survivor and dealing seriously with these issues and trying to create resources for other survivors, of course it deepened my question as to why does this mess happen in the first place, particularly as I began to research, and more I found that this was a problem not just in my own life, not just in America, but it's a worldwide epidemic. And so I went on a quest for the answer. I wanted to seriously contemplate, and then I wondered, how come no one has answered this question before? Like, how did this get to be such an epidemic and no one ever became serious about the ideology of it? Like, why do we have it, and why is there so little concern about it? So as I began to really ponder that and develop my own understanding and awareness of sexuality, sexual abuse in general, and then what happens is that ultimately I ran into the topic of male dominance in its relationship to sexual abuse, and started to look at the question of male dominance, as that seemed to be related to sexual abuse worldwide. Especially the more I looked at the numbers, about the 90% of violators are males, and what that looks like and the age in which it takes place, and then looking at some of the relationships to that, such as forced marriages and the sex slave and all these other things that are related to sexual abuse. And so one of the things that I do is write poetry, as a couple people have alluded to, and poetry has been sort of my communication with the universe. And so it's how I seek answers, it's how I project discoveries, it's how I go within. And so I did that with this question, like, give me something, tell me some truth. And so when I opened myself up to this question in view of poetry, I'm going to share with you what came out. And so this poem that came out that took me months to write, which is unusual because, as many poets will tell you, generally our poems just sort of pour into us, and we pour them out on a piece of paper. And this poem came to me as I pondered this question, and it took months for it to unfold. It became a 4-part poem, and one of the reasons is because it was different than anything I'd ever written. In fact, it was different than anything I'd ever thought. But I believe in my poetry, and hopefully today you will too. You might not, but I trust what my poetry brings me. And so I wrote it in faith. And so as I started writing it, and the ideas that were coming to me as I wrote, I started researching. One, I was researching because I thought, like, seriously? Like, really? Like, can I provide any evidence for this? Because this doesn't even sound realistic to me, right? But I believe in my poetry. And so over a course of 4 months, I wrote this 4-part poem. And over the course of a year, I edited the poem, and then I started performing it. So this has been an evolution for me in terms of presenting this and being clear whether this was really what I wanted to say to the world, and what I really thought that I was given when I pondered this question. And so I came up with the theory. The poem ended up being a theory. The poem came before the theory. And so the theory is that original sin was actually Adam raping Eve, right? And a reaction that you have, like, what? Right? That was my reaction when I was writing. Like, what? Like what? What? Right? So just keep writing. Like, just keep writing. Just write it down, right? I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write this. So the theory goes that suggests that the reason why it's so difficult to get rid of is because it is the original sin, and until we deal with original sin, then the world will continue to be the chaos that it has. And so I want to share with you a little bit more about the theory, and then I'm going to present the four-part poem to you in its totality, which will be a treat because it'll be my first time doing that in Iowa. So I want to share, before I do the poem, I want to share with you the four or maybe five assumptions that are outlined in the poem, so that when you hear the poem, you have some understanding of why I'm saying what I'm saying. So the theory is called gene pooling. The book that I have over there called Original Sin is an outline of the theory. I don't have the theory completely finished yet, or it's finished in my head, it's not finished in paper. What I do have as a copy is the poem in its totality and an explanation of the poem, which is really like a preview to what eventually will be a book on gene pooling, and my theory about gene pooling and that sort of stuff. So the first assumption is that evolution and religion are fundamentally the same. So one assumption is that we've always heard the conflict between religion and evolution. But what has occurred to me, and I don't think I'm even the first person to say this. In fact, most of what I say, I'm not the first person to say it. I'm the first person, to my knowledge, that put it all together into a theory and said, hey, look at the totality of it. But part of the issue is that many people have looked at pieces of it and not put the whole thing together. So the pieces that I have are not original thought in many aspects. The totality of it and the theory of it is what is original. So there seems to be this conflict, seemingly a conflict between religion and evolution. But what I propose in the theory, in the gene pooling theory, is that there's a problem with both that make them fundamentally the same. And so they're both trying to explain why, or include at least why, we have the conflict that we have in our world today, right? And so what religion has always done is basically said we're products of sin, or something happened. And when you look at the Abrahamic religions, they all say essentially the same thing, that something happened. They don't always agree on what the consequences were of that action, but they all agree and are trying to tell this story that something happened. Something happened to create conflict in the world, and that something happened because of something that man did that created this conflict that followed, right? So they pretty much say the same thing, right? Evolution talks about survival of the fittest, and the idea that, well, everybody's not going to make it, so we have to fight each other. This conflict will always exist because there has to be someone on top, right? Here's the problem with both of those theories. They both start from a position in evolution that's post-male dominance. So what happens is that evolution, billions of years ago, before the first scripture was ever written, before the first words were ever spoken, in fact, before English was ever anything that is, there was a time where humans existed in the earth. And we don't talk about that time. So what happens is, as the time that man has given us, that has brought us to this discussion about human beings through religion and theory of evolution, at the time that we're allowed to talk about the conditions of man, male dominance already exists. That's problematic. So no one talks about a time when male dominance didn't exist. And so if we're only going to talk about it as from starting with the existence of male dominance, then it leaves us the impression that that's just how it is. That's just how it's supposed to be. It's always been that way. Well, it's always been that way in terms of how it has been introduced in the world. That doesn't mean it's always been that way. But it is true that when we look at religion, religion is telling us, well, this is how we got this way, right? I mean, so, we fast forward there was creation in 7 days. That's it, right? But the reason Genesis is so important, I believe, is because it's trying to tell us a story of how we got this way. And that's the whole point of it. How do we get to be where we are? And so it gives us this very short synopsis of what happened in 7 days, because what happened in 7 days wasn't as important as what happened once this conflict took place, right? Evolution does pretty much the same thing. Well, let me tell you how bad this conflict between human beings are. It's gonna be like this because, but no one really addresses the issue that there was a time before both of those times, I believe, where we existed a long time, and again, I'm not the first person who have suggested this, but there was a time where human beings survived on cooperation, not conflict. So we didn't come in from after the Big Bang, so it's a Big Bang and then conflict. No, we actually survived in the world post the Big Bang. We actually survived in the world based on principles of cooperation and solidarity. We survived that way for I don't know how many years, a long time, presumably, right? So it's not that conflict has always been in the world. It's not that sin has always been in the world. But that's the only world we address, or the only world that we talk about. So my first premise is that evolution and religion are fundamentally the same. They're describing the same thing. The reason why they both start at that point is because that indeed, I believe, is the most significant point. But they don't talk about the significance of the point, but it is the most significant point. They're trying to get us to understand that something happened, right? And that something happened that we're responsible for, but then we convolute what that happening was, because how can we talk about rape in the midst of male dominance when it's at its peak? No one could even have that conversation. It was not a conversation that even was possible to ever have. And so instead of having a meaningful conversation, we present symbols, which a lot of what is written biblically is symbolic. And so instead of having a conversation about what the real problem was, all these symbols are put into place, and then a lot of other things happen. But fundamentally, evolution and religion were trying to describe the same thing. There is an ancient relationship between coerced sex and world conflict. So the premise is that at the point in which this conflict happened, where Adam raped Eve, that indeed was the point in which conflict entered the world, which is why it was so significant when we talk about the Garden of Eden and what was happening. The Garden of Eden being a period of time, not necessarily a specific place, but a period of time, right? When things were cooperative. So the Bible hints at it, right? So there was a period of time. That's what makes this such a significant thing, because they did something to cross out of the Garden of Eden, and then since that time something horrible happened. So in the poem, hopefully you'll follow the evidence as to why I get to say it was rape and some of the evidence for that. But here's what I want you to understand about the time before time. And this is why the theory is called gene pooling. So gene pooling is the idea that my genes are more important to be passed down than anyone else's genes. Like, that's the purpose. And that's sort of what theory of evolution tells us. It's all about getting your genes in a gene pool. So when we talk about survival of the fittest, we're not just talking about who stay alive today. We're talking about whose genes get into the gene pool. That's the focus of the theory of evolution. It says we all have to scramble, because what matters at the end of the day is that your genes are more viable, that your genes are the most viable for the gene pool. Does that make sense? That's theory of evolution. That's not Dr. Bakari. That's theory of evolution, right? So here's the thing that I want to sink your teeth into. The period of time where man and woman were living together in harmony, if that was a period of time, then what that meant is that females were in control of the gene pool. So as long as you have in place a system that says you have to have consent to do that, right? That means females are in control exclusively of the gene pool. And here's why I think that's so fantastic and why I think it's so empowering for women, because women, and I do believe in evolution. I don't believe in Darwin's interpretation, just like I don't believe in some of the interpretations of the Bible, but I certainly believe in evolution. So whenever I have these ideas, I always sort of use evolution background, like, no, is that consistent with evolution? Can that fit in, right? I mean, this is one of my fact checks, right? And so here's what I have come to understand. When you look at males and females, we can go back to the conversation we had previously on sexuality. If females are exclusively in control of the gene pool, because the only way that a person's genes, a male's gene, can get passed on is through intercourse with the female, then that gives female a lot of responsibility, right? And so a female has to be equipped to handle that responsibility, not just control, but responsibility. So my theory suggests that that is exactly why the clitoris is outside of the vagina. That is exactly why females are capable of multiple orgasms. So, how do I believe we control the gene pool or manage the gene pool? I believe through sexuality, which is one more reason why I believe it is so critical for survivors to heal their sexuality. It's so critical. If we're ever going to take back the gene pool, we must heal our sexuality. So if we're going to pass down our gene pool, and the idea is that we want those genes in the gene pool that will keep humanity going in the most humane way, and all we have is sexuality, because we don't know a lot about language, which certainly nothing is written, right? We don't have schools or education or anything like that, right? It's just a bunch of people. Nobody's driving around in a Mercedes and saying, hey, I got this. And like, nobody, there's not a whole lot to go on. What we do have to go on is sexuality. And so at that time, people were, and again, I'm not the first one to say this, we think people were primarily bisexual. Because it didn't matter. Like, we didn't know a whole lot. Like, people want to have physical touch. They had physical touch. They weren't exclusively with the other partner. We didn't, like, all that came later as we decided we were these kinds of people, right? And so people pleasured one another. And so the thing is, the female who is in control of the gene pool, because no gene can get carried on unless it comes to a woman's body, now is equipped. So how did the female decide whether or not you had good genes? What do we want? What kind of genes do we want to pass down? We want to pass down genes, likely, because it's a cooperative society, we want to pass down genes of people who are patient, because that was what we had, and kind, and generous, right? What do you need to have orgasm? Patience, kindness, generosity. Right? So I believe that sexuality is exactly how we chose people. And guess what? You didn't need penetration. So we could have all the orgasms and joy and whatever without penetration. Females didn't need penetration. So penetration could be reserved for those people who you chose to pass down their genes. Did I lose anybody? Right? Okay. So that's how that theory goes. So females in control. Now here's what happened. For however long, I'm assuming this went on for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years at least. People are living cooperatively with one another. In come Adam. And Adam's not just this is evolution, so it wasn't one man just from dirt. I mean, Adam represented men and Eve represented females. Right, in the theory of evolution at least. And so once Adam, whether it's one man or a group of men, once Adam decides that rape is a viable option, because for whatever reason, I don't want to wait, or that doesn't make sense, or how am I going to get chosen? Well, for whatever reason that day, Adam decides that being chosen is not viable, then Adam decides to rape. Once rape enters into the world, it changes everything. Everything. Here's the thing. Once, if you and I, if your table have this tribe, and you're cooperative, and women are chosen, and women have to choose whose genes get passed down, and you're okay with that, because that's how it's cooperative. It requires patience and kindness and that sort of stuff. And then these people over here decide that they don't want to wait for that. And so they prepare, and so they begin to rape. Once these people over here begin to rape women, begin to use rape as an option for passing along their genes, there's two things that happen that's critical. One, that means that the people who want to be good, you were patient, kind, and generous, now you have to fight. That creates the conflict between man and man. I have to fight you to keep you from raping a woman I'm trying to be kind, generous, and patient with. So that creates the conflict between man. That was the first war. It's never ended. Okay? So that was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened is once you have to become my protector, we're no longer equal. Once you change that relationship from partners to protector, we're no longer equal. You cannot tell me you equal with me. You get your butt behind that door and put some clothes on. No, you can't go outside. You're gonna, because every time you go out there, you endanger my life and yours. Isn't that what we do with our children to keep them safe? Keep them in, hide them, don't let, no, not after dark, right? Because we're their protectors. We're not equal, because we're their protectors. Right? So once men have to become our protectors, and we agreed to that, I think we agreed to that, that seemed fair. We both get to live another day. If you go out, like, okay, I'll stay here, I'll put on clothes, yeah, I know, stay behind the window, no, I know, I can't do all that, right? So we probably agreed to that.